Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Deployed Engineer channel. Today, our guest is Jimil. Jimil is an ex-Adobe engineer. He's currently an AI engineer working at a startup that's making a big difference in product management, or I'd say they're trying to revolutionize and improve it and use this current AI systems. Jimil is in Silicon Valley, and he is very familiar with some of the things going on in terms of the developments. He's familiar with a lot of the newer agentic systems, and he's building one, and leading a lot of initiatives around some important things in the startup he's working at. Jimil has a background in computer science, and him and I go a long way. I know him from since I was a child, and so we share a lot of opinions on different things. And I wanted to do this pod with him. So, Jimil, welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Baulika. Super excited to be here.
Cool. What's your current role, and how is it different from the kind of things you're doing before?
Yeah, so right now I'm in an AI engineering role. I'm part of a stealth startup, and we are building an AI product manager that can manage a feature you're working from end to end. That is from like scoping all the way to managing the project itself to like tracking the deliverables. So yeah, I am working a lot on the back end, building an agentic system for some of our workflows where we have an agent which can integrate with your internal company data sources, and do deep research on that data, do some deep research on the internet, collaborate with you to scope out the entire thing. So I am working building the agentic system on the back end along with my technical leader, who is also our CEO. Recently I've been focused a lot on the tool design of the agent, and I can talk more about that. But yeah, at a high level, from a technical standpoint and a tech stack standpoint, we are using LangGraph in the backend. So Python with LangGraph, and we have Next.js frontend as well. And we are using the React, and the newly released React library for LangGraph and LangChain on the front end as well, and also using Convex for the back end. So that's kind of a brief introduction on what we are working on.
That's interesting. LangGraph seems to be this upcoming part of the tech stack in backends to power these AI agents. What do you find interesting about LangGraph that you cannot do with just like writing plain agents? What do you find particularly useful?
Yeah, interesting question. So I think like when you're building agents, it's all about like orchestrating all these workflows, different workflows. So, for example, it's about orchestrating a lot of decisions. For example, when should the agent make a tool call versus when should it maybe have a human in the loop? When how can it make all these decisions in real time? Let's say if you're building a deep research agent, you kind of want to give it a protocol to work on, which is kind of like instructing or teaching the agent how to best conduct its job. So like it has a set of protocol to follow. Like when you, for example, when should always maybe try to search internal company data first before trying to do an external search. And if it cannot find some data internally, maybe another decision there is to when to involve a human, maybe ask questions, gather more context. So all these workflows, it's very, I think the best framework for it like is kind of like a graph, which LangGraph is. So, when you have all these like branches and complex workflows, the best data structure representation of it seems to be a graph, and that's what LangGraph essentially is. It builds out a graph where you're kind of the pioneer of this graph, where you define all these workflows for your agent. So yeah, the LangGraph just gives you that flexibility to kind of build a graph for your agent, which is kind of like building a brain for your agent in some sense. So that's kind of what makes LangGraph super interesting. And I think like also LangGraph is an open source project. I like to listen to Harrison Chase, who is who is the CEO leading this initiative at LangGraph, is super passionate. I've always followed Harrison ever since the early days of LangChain, and one one impressive thing about Harrison is like he just moves incredibly fast. He is always at the forefront, so you can put your trust on him. And like LangGraph, if you're trying to build AI agents, you can put your trust on him in the sense that that if you're someone who likes to move fast in this world, it's a platform where it can keep up with the pace.
Oh, that's super cool. Could you share like how you're developing like these features in the sense of like what kind of tooling are you using? How are you learning about things while balancing it with using these AI tools? And how do you recommend anyone who is new trying to do something similar?
Yeah, so for someone like wanting to get into this field right now, and so for someone who wants to learn right now, the best answer is to kind of leverage AI. What that means is like kind of leverage AI to make to become like as a superpower to help you in learning. So the way like I I just started using LangGraph recently. It's not been too long, but what has enabled me to be able to just move fast with it is to leverage LLMs in learning stuff. So for someone who is wanting to learn LangGraph, obviously the best way is to first just start experimenting with it. Do some personal projects using LangGraph. Try to build like a simple agent, and then while you're doing that, leverage LLMs. And you have all these tools. You have your IDE tools, which are like Cursor. You have Cloud Code, where you can like now you can really collaborate in real time with those agents in those tools. You can paste. So the way I do it, sometimes I just either like share the link to the documentation, or paste entire documentation into like maybe like Cloud Code or Cursor, and just have it understand it, and just kind of collaborate with it to help me out. I think like one of the key learnings there in how to leverage this AI systems is sometimes they are good at getting context. So I think context engineering is the most important thing here. Sometimes they're really good at getting context, and sometimes they are not. In the former, it's really good when it was trained on particular like data set, or like particular APIs or libraries that were already there. But something like LangGraph, which is like moving really fast. There are like new features being put, new code being pushed out every day. Like the docs are getting updated every day. The LLMs are going to be missing those most recent contexts. So I think like your job is to just get those contexts, kind of like whatever you're trying to work on. Just be really good at researching those resources or API docs online, and just pipe that entire thing to the LLM, and it should be able to like help you there. I think for someone, yeah, first like just create a passion side project, try to build agentic systems using LangGraph, and while you do that, leverage these tools like Cursor and Cloud Code in just learn how to best collaborate with it, and that will be like super helpful.
That's nice. What's your cursor workflow like? Let's say you have a feature that the customer wants. How do you iterate on that from end to end?
Yeah, right now I have a very interesting cursor workflow for now. It kind of just, I don't want to be repetitive. It's the very fundamental bottleneck is context management and context engineering. When you're working on something in like Cursor or Cloud Code, you often collaborate with it, and there's a long running conversation. And the longer it gets, the more challenging it gets in terms of like for the LLM to maintain that context, or sometimes you can run out of context. As an engineer, I think like the number one challenge for you is to how to manage that context. And the way I solve it is I have a very interesting workflow where like whenever I'm working on any new feature in my project, I just create a kind of a dummy file that I never commit, but I put that file into the project. I call it something like progress.md. So I put that file into the project, and as I am collaborating with the AI in like Cursor or like Cloud Code, every time I collaborate with it, I tell it like keep updating progress.md. So what happens then is like when I'm at a point where like I'm almost like having a very long conversation or running out of context with the LLM, like I can just clear the entire context for in Cloud Code. And when I pick back up, I'm just like, can you read progress.md and understand it fully before we continue? And then it reads the entire progress.md, and so before, one thing I forgot to mention before, when it's writing the updates to progress.md, I tell it to like really really summarize kind of the progress. It should be more like, this is just like the progress we've made. This is what, let's say we are building a feature. So let's say we have the feature required to create five tools. It required to create like a new table in the database. It requires to expose a new endpoint. So we have all these tasks. So I just tell it to like just put a very brief summary of what you have accomplished so far. So it will be like, I have already created the endpoint and it's at this file. I have already created the mutation for this table in the database. It's in this file. Next, what's left to work is XYZ. So it's like super summarized. And so like when I pick back up, I can you read this progress? This is what we're working on. Once you've read it, let me know. And then it will be like, yeah, I've read it. Like, I'm sure, let's start. And then like I start the process again. So it just boils down to how do you manage this context? Because before, what was happening was I wasn't doing this, and I was having very long running conversations with the AI. And after some point, it just becomes that the lag is just too much. The context is getting out of hand. So like the iteration gets a lot more slower, because every new request you tell it, it has to like pre-process this entire like previous conversation. And sometimes like if you have used Cloud Code or Cursor, like it will, if you don't manage the context, it will trigger a summarization. And I haven't had too much luck with the summarization. Like it has never worked well for me. And so I just had to innovate around this. And this is kind of how I do it. Yeah. Apart from that, yeah, it's just like collaborating with the AI, then doing your regular software engineering workflow, where you're building end-to-end features, like testing it out, making sure like you're testing it out. Testing and code quality is important. I have realized that the large language models, like I use Claude Sonnet for building. I use GPT-5 for bugs. GPT-5 is really good at like really digging really deep. So I've found it really good with bugs. And then once I GPT-5 can find a bug or something, I would pipe that into Sonnet for implementation. But coming back to my point, I was saying I found like Sonnet, sometimes it has a lot of fallbacks, which I don't like. So in terms of code quality, it will try to have all these fallbacks in the sense that it will have like if else, if else, if else. It wants to take care of all these edge cases, but not in the most elegant way. So that's one challenge that I've always had to prompt Sonnet and just be like, we need to fail fast. Like don't add like a lot of like fallbacks, and we need to take care with proper like maybe exception handling, or fail fast if there's a bug. So that's kind of when it comes to testing and code quality, I have to make sure about that. But that's kind of my general workflow.
Oh, that's great. Are you using any MCPs in your Cursor or Cloud Code to make your workflow easy?
Yeah, so I don't use a lot of MCPs. The only MCP that I think is helpful in some sense, although like it's not that I've seen it triggered a lot of times, is this tool called Contact 7. Do you know about Contact 7?
Is it the one that goes and fetches the documentation and then it comes back with the documents?
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually that's the only one that I have added in. It's the Context 7 MCP. And so sometimes it is good, although like sometimes it misses to use that MCP. So I think like a little bit of prompting there as well. Like if you are working on something that the things are like have moved fast, like there's probably new documentation on that. It will be good to just prompt the language model and be like, can we also like consult the Context 7 tool, make sure like we are using the latest libraries and APIs. So that's kind of what the one MCP I have so far. I mean, I'm interested to know, have you found any other MCPs that are helpful?
When I was working with like Firebase and Supabase, I got the MCPs for the databases. They sometimes don't work so well. I found that with SQL databases, MCPs worked a lot better than with NoSQL databases because you have this different structures. SQL databases have a very defined metadata schema. NoSQL allows you to dump anything most of the time. So that makes it harder for LLMs to use MCP on NoSQL databases. Other than that, I tried Playwright MCP, which works sometime. It's able to see your browser and figure out any issues and come back and tell you that I see an error on your browser. Let me try to fix that. So those two. But I noticed one interesting thing. At one point I had like 10 MCPs and then I would have a real problem because it seems that when you have so many, you're overloading the context. Like you mentioned context engineering. When the AI is like full of context and it has to realize it has all these tools, then it starts making mistakes because you've eaten up all the context window, making it remember things, right? So that was my experience with MCPs actually.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that is very accurate. It boils down to the context management, and if if you have 1,000 tools and maybe like you don't need all of them, you definitely want to reduce just to the very core ones you need, just to preserve as much context as possible. It's
Yeah,
interesting. This is not in my coding workflow, but I'm building like tools that MCP tools in our current agentic workflow. And this is also like the same exact bottleneck, just like making sure we have the correct MCP tools, just the ones we need in the context, so that we can preserve the context.
that's cool. So what would you say is your split when you're like writing code? How many times are you like handwriting versus using AI? And I think a lot of engineers are hesitant saying how much of it they use because it almost feels like it demeans your ability to write code. And I think the better you are, the harder it is for you. But I'm starting to realize that a lot of actually really smart people like Linus Torvald, who actually created Linux, I don't think there's a person who might be as smart as Linus in terms of like hardcore software. And there was an interesting thing he was asked by somebody. He's like some interviewer on the panel asked him like, what do you think about using AI for coding? And Linus said, I think humans make more mistakes.
Sorry,
So
sorry. What did you say?
he said, I think it's not a problem because he said in his experience humans made more mistakes.
Yeah, yeah. No, very interesting.
So he said, use it. In short, he said, use it, and he encourages and he uses it, which was very fascinating to me. I would think that he's the first person to say no, and his justification was interesting. He said, we already have so many layers. We don't write bytecode. We have assembly. Then we came up with C, and then we came up with Java, and so forth until today, where we have natural language. So there are errors, but there's a weird phenomenon where people are trying to think like, is this making my brain rot, or should I be or is this the normal evolution of things?
Yeah.
What's your thought on this?
Just continuing on that conversation on like prominent people on this topic is another one is like this from Andre Karpathy, who is one of the top computer scientists out there. He had this tweet where like his English is the new programming language, and yeah, we are seeing a lot of that. And yeah, to answer your question, almost doing 80% 80% code review by like the LLM, and 20% maybe writing. I think like, yeah, you just have become a lot more of a pioneer and like reviewer of LLM generated code compared to like writing code. It just helps you see the thing with LLM generated code or writing code with AI. It's just not the raw output of the code. It's just not like the raw output of the code, but behind the scenes there's a lot going on, right? So one interesting thing I can tell you, what do you think is the pace of a human reading 10 files compared to the pace of an LLM reading 10 files is? obviously an LLM is like orders of magnitude faster, right? Like if I know like the feature I'm working on, if there's context for that feature in like, let's say 5 files, I will just like add that to the prompt and I'm like, okay, files A, B, C, D, and E have code that are related to this feature. Could you like review this code, understand it, and work with me on like building this feature? And for an LLM to read those 5 files is like a matter of seconds, right? Now, how about a human? Like read, like let's say reading those 5 files and understanding all the code in detail that is in there. Let's say a lot of the code was written by other teammates. There's a lot of things change. Um, it's gonna take a lot orders of magnitude more. So it's about like, it's just not the raw output of the code. There's a lot that goes behind it. So it's when you're collaborating with the AI, there's also this there's a lot of background superpowers that you unlock. So for example, you can delegate to it to just understand the code, and you can collaborate with it. Once it has understand the code, you can collaborate with it and say, oh, okay, so if this is how we handle, let's say, authentication, since it has already read everything about authentication, if this is how we handle authentication, this, okay, we can add this new maybe file that will handle, maybe we are missing proper like session management or something, and then you just take it from there, and you say, okay, these are the requirements for the session management. You have all this context from these other files. We can leverage those APIs and in all those files, and kind of build out this new class that will take care of session management. I think so. A lot of my workflow is kind of like that. So it's almost like 80% like LLM like generated code, but like then also like I'm spending like almost the same equal amount of time reviewing that code and making sure. And so then I will review. I have so one interesting thing that I have also added to my workflow, maybe I should have talked about this as well, is like a lot of like test scripts. So then I will, and again leveraging AI in this as well, I will work with it to just like quickly, super quick generate like test scripts, that testing scripts, and then I'll just then I will take a lot of time in that script. I will often be running those scripts in debug mode and investigate each and every like line, understand like that code deeply, and then in that process there will be like some fixes that I will like either I'll manually do it or like continue collaborating with the AI. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about AI generated code, LLM generated code. It's kind of a superpower like that makes you like move fast. So for example, like reading 5 files, like before maybe I would have taken over 30 minutes, an hour to understand, but with this I can now take like 2 seconds to understand five files, right? I look at it in that way. And then let's say like once I've done that code generation, let's say that for that feature I'm working on, I need to write, let's say, 2000 lines of code across 10 different files, let's say, for example. Okay, previously I would do the same 2000 lines of code in 10 different files. I know what I want to put in there, but like to actually type it out and write the entire thing in 10 different files would have taken me maybe it can even take more, like 3 4 hours, 5 hours, who knows. But if we know, if I know what I want to achieve in with those lines of code in those different files, LLM can write those 2000 lines in less than 5 minutes. It can write that. So that's how I look at it. It's about like just giving you this superpower to move fast with like new superpowers, but at the same time, just also like learning these new ways of maintaining code quality and testing. So which is like kind of that time that I'm saying that it saved me on like writing code, understanding like the context. I will put a lot more. I will take out some chunk of that time and put it into writing the scripts, like debugging manually, understanding the code it has outputted. And I think it has also enabled me to be like to really learn code review, because previously code review would come at a PR stage, like pull request stage. But now there's like even a workflow before that where I'm just like, it's like the AI is creating an internal pull request for me every time, and I'm just
I like
reviewing that.
that.
So it has given me a lot of like review like skills. So then even like when I look at a PR, like I'm like, I'm so used to it now. Like it has definitely helped me like build those review skills as well.
Yeah, I like that. The framework has changed because I like how you put it in your frame of thinking. You've become a code reviewer like more than you would be otherwise. And traditionally, I think the most impact is also at code review, considering that that's where the code actually merges. So now you're doing code review twice before you actually do a real pull request, and just when you're developing, you're accepting selectively, right?
Yeah,
And good engineers will be the good code reviewers in the future, right? You'll just become better and better at reviewing. And I think as you're becoming senior, you are doing a lot less coding, interestingly enough, and you move to a position where you are making more decisions on the quality of the code, and that's through the
exactly.
reviews, right?
Yeah, it's
So
almost like as if like you're it also like helps you build management skills in some sense. It's like you're managing like a junior engineer. Everybody has become like has the chance to become a manager now. Like if you're someone who also gives you leverage to build those skills, or like I find myself a lot like managing whatever LLM I'm working with or AI I'm working with, and I'm doing a lot of like management as well, where I'll be like, it's almost like I'm managing this junior engineer. It comes back to me with some code, some insights, and I will actually give it a new direction, a new insight. And actually, interesting enough, Cloud Code just I think recently released this. It kind of in a way they have this. They released the plan mode, which is like it's kind of the same exact thing. Plan mode is like the LLM does not write any line of code until like you plan with it. So it's an iterative process. So you're kind of like collaborating, managing it. And then from there, like once you have you have agreed on a plan, it can go and implement that. So yeah, it's exactly what Cloud Code plan mode does.
that's cool. I'll check it out, I think. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. What are some of the resources you use to stay on top of this field? A lot of people ask me, and I also prick other people on how do you keep up, because you don't have docs yet, you don't have a lot of evangelists yet. There's a lot of mixed feelings, and there's a bit of a disruption as well. How do you keep up with this technology?
Yeah, I think the way I keep up with the technology, obviously, I think just being in the correct communities and networks is kind of like the first thing that keeps me updated. That's like, there's like online and in person like communities. So online communities, you can think about it more like X or Twitter, formerly Twitter. There are a lot of like engineers having very like great discussions there on what they're working on, new research that is out, and it's both technical and non-technical. There are a lot of non-technical insights as well there. So I found like yeah, X and Twitter like the most interesting there, where like people are like very good like technical thoughts, what they're working on, what they've discovered, like sharing. A lot of people are also like, continuously sharing open source projects. They're kind of launching it and sharing the code. So I have found like interesting open source projects there, when you have people who are sharing research papers as well, interesting research papers. So that's one. When it comes to uh, LinkedIn is also another one. Like if you do follow a lot of like interesting people in the field, in the research field, or like AI engineering field, there are a lot of blog posts on LinkedIn as well, and people discussing.
Do you have any, I guess, on Twitter specific people, and like or LinkedIn, or like any very specific people you like to follow?
There's one person I can't have his exact name off the top of my mind right now, but like I think just following like all of the people were the forefront of the space, kind of all the leaders. Like, I like reading stuff that Andre Karpathy puts out, and then there's like, I like to follow the blog posts for companies. There's one person, I believe his name starts with Simon. He does a lot of LLM security research and review. I find him very interesting as well. And also just following founders is super interesting. So following founders who are building in this space, they will share a lot of their learnings as they build. Previously, earlier I talked about Harrison Chase. He also puts super interesting content out there, and just following every like founders who are building in this space. I think the founder of um, Llama Index as well. He's interesting. So those are kind of the people. Honestly, I engage. To be honest with you, I engage with this post a lot, to the extent that the Twitter or like X algorithm, just every day, like there's someone new with some interesting like insight or idea that just pops up into my feed. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it.
Nice. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Well, we can go in a segue. You've been in the Bay Area and you've been outside the Bay Area. What do you think makes like the Bay Area interesting in terms of the mindset, and how can like other places or other ecosystems learn from that based on your experience?
About the online one, but this is actually a good segment. So I was gonna actually talk about the like the in-person one, which is like attending. The other way to keep up with this is like just being really part of the community. So which is like attending like hackathons, events, conferences. Those are like very very good. So like in the Bay Area, yeah, one of the biggest like advantages of being in the Bay is kind of the network here. You have a network of super smart people here in the Bay Area. They're always like, everyone is, like there are like hackathons being hosted every day. So signing up to these hackathons, events, also conferences, and just going in, meeting people in the space, building with them is super interesting. Building the network, and also those are the same networks that are, you mentioned, like, do you find some interesting people online? Those are the same network of people who you're gonna like follow on LinkedIn or like on Twitter or whatever, and you're going to get advantage of both, like their content online, and like also just like building a network. Yeah, being in the coming back to the point, in the being in the Silicon Valley or Bay, I think it's the best decision like I made. I think it's the best it is, if you are, working, if you are passionate about building, working in tech, being in this space, I think this is, an unmatched place to be. It just unlocks a lot of the doors for you. It is incredible. You can meet like so many people that you never thought you would meet. Like, sometimes you might even just be in a random cafe or something, and you might bump into like anyone in the space. You can bump into like some very interesting founders, like who are disrupting some space that you're interested in. You can be walking in San Francisco maybe, and you just pass by, someone, maybe like some engineer who's working at like, maybe for example, Cursor, or and stuff like that. And just like also like being in events and hackathons, and also like I've found that people are very very open minded here. So when you meet them, they're very open minded. They want to help you out. So like I think the bottleneck is, if you are here, the bottleneck is just like yourself, in some sense. Like there's like the world is yours here. And the bottleneck is just like for you to take the steps to go out there, meet people, ask the right questions, like help others out, and like that will also replicate towards that same energy will replicate towards you. So, and there's always every day there's something happening here. One unique thing about the culture here is, whether it's a Saturday or a Sunday or any day, everyone is sort of just aligned on one mission in some sense. Like everyone wants, they're aligned on like wants to kind of build and to just further their very career focus. You get this incredible like energy broadcasted to you where like everyone that same energy just comes into you where you also are just naturally like gravitated towards like like spearheading or like building a good career out here. Yeah, it's an incredible place to be. It has been a very positive experience.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and then one of the things I ask every guest is like, what are some limitations that large language models have in terms of things that people should be aware of when they're using them? Initially, there was a lot of hallucinations. It's being controlled now, but what's your perspective on it? And do you think that it'll go away at one point? What's your thought around this?
Yeah, this is a interesting question. I would like to caveat here that, well, okay, one of the fundamental things when working with large language models is I personally believe that you should really strive to understand like how the underlying technology and architecture works. As an engineer, I think one of the most important things when working with large language models and something that I strive to is to actually understand the underlying architecture and how it works. And this is super very technical, very difficult to understand. But like if you can even understand like 1%, like 5% of how the behind the scenes machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, the architecture that was introduced in the attention is all you need paper, like understanding what exactly is this attention they're talking about. If you can just, if you like, even if you understand 5 to 10%, you're way ahead of everyone. First thing is like understanding like large language models and how they work. Like, like understanding that they are like understanding the completions aspect of it where it's trying to predict the next token. So that's just like straight out of the ground. Like first thing is to understand that and how that works. And when you have that foundational knowledge, then the kind of like one layer above, the layer outside, that's the layer like hallucinations and all these things, you start to understand like more about why this happens. And then once you understand like, okay, why hallucination happens, you go one step further and you now know how to maybe really really reduce the probability of that. So for example, underlying thing is like, like a language model is trying to predict the next token, is completion based. So by the virtue of it, it's kind of almost a user request to an LLM is almost like asking the LLM to output something even if it doesn't have the answer to it, like predict something. Basically it's a prediction of the right.
Correct.
So that's where hallucination comes from. So then once you understand this and okay, let's say I am asking a large language model to predict something, but I haven't given it the right tools, like, right? Let's say I ask a large language model to predict what was released in LangGraph as of today, as of a few hours ago. Okay, if I ask it to predict that, since it's like completion and trying to predict, it will like try its best to predict something, and it will probably hallucinate. But at the same time, if I give it like the context 7 docs or MCP or tools, and then I ask it to predict and use that tools, then it then knows like, first let me use this tool, get the insight, and then like then continue to serve the user request. So I think like the first step is to just and this is something that I am also trying to learn, is like, as I said, it's extremely difficult to understand. But yeah, just I think the first step is to try understanding that. So that's kind of like just like on a fundamental level what helps. And then from there, it's about like understanding the best use cases for it. And there are things that large language models are like really good at, and there might be some things that maybe they're not there yet. For comparison, we know like some basic stuff, like they're really good at like a summarization task. They're very good at like code generation. They can like generate like code like really well. Like they can maybe like do summarization task really well over like 100-page PDF. Maybe they can summarize. And we've seen this before, like with the like the 3 hours in the strawberry kind of thing where it doesn't get that sometimes. So like then identifying, like let's say there's like some complex workflow that you will have to kind of steer it towards the right direction, understanding just what it's good at versus where it needs a lot of like input and help. Identifying the right use case for it is super important. It's really easy to try to make shortcuts with this large language model because they have worked for you for one use case really well. You think they will work for you for all use cases, or sometimes like you maybe you like maybe you've just given it a coding task and it did really well for you. You will just assume if I give it this other task, it will just like work perfectly. But like I think like just identifying the different use cases, what it's good at and what it's not, and keeping that in mind when using them. On a technical level, I mean, my use of AI by far like 99% is in code generation. So a lot of the stuff I will be talking about is like code generation related. I think I touched on this earlier is okay. Oh, and the other thing to this is like identifying. I think another thing I can talk about is identifying which language model is good at which task. So I think this comes back a little bit to the use case scenario that I've talked. Like for example, I've learned like GPT-5 is really good at like debugging. So like identifying this is like once you identify that, like Claude Sonnet is like really good at given a like very clear like description or task. It's just like really good at implementing. Sometimes I found like Claude Sonnet cannot find a bug, while GPT-5 can really deep into like the code um and identify the bug. I have also noticed like the larger different language models are trained. Yeah, they have different behavior when it comes to tool calling. So like I've seen GPT-5 or Claude Sonnet doing good in some scenarios, like doing tool calling versus like GPT-5 doing poorly in tool calling. So like identifying all the different like language models and what their strengths are and basically what their pros are and what their cons are. And then your job is to kind of like make all this, like how can you orchestrate all this and kind of like orchestrate all of their strengths together to give you this superpower. I think, yeah, I think that's another thing that I've learned that is super interesting. And then, yeah, coming back to like the code quality, when it comes to Sonnet, like the one outstanding thing that I've just seen is just like the fallback logic. I've seen it making a lot of assumptions where it will write a lot of like fallbacks if else statements, and it leads to a lot of like kind of poor code, like spaghetti code, like if else. So in that case, like I think doing a lot of planning with it and identifying these edge cases ahead of time and telling it, okay, this value from our database is optional. It will be an optional, but I want you, if it's undefined, throw an error. Instead, like I found it like identifying all those edge cases and telling it ahead of time is good, because what Sonnet I've noticed will do is like as soon as it says an optional, it will be like if there's some value, do something else. It will put some default there. It will just try to come up with its own like fallback logic. So yeah, so doing a lot of planning on those edge cases is something also interesting. So those are kind of the things that I've learned on how to use the language models is interesting. And the last thing is sometimes you can just try like many times and the language model might just not be able to help you out. And in those cases, like then it's just like important to yourself like really go in, like dive into the problem and get really into the root of it and get all this context, because it's kind of now you're doing the debugging for it, and then where it can help you like actually like fix whatever bug is there.
Okay, that's interesting because different models are trained in very many different ways. I noticed that Anthropic has trained its models on a lot of APIs, so it ended up becoming really good at programming because it understands APIs better than any other model that's writing code. So it is useful to know what model is good at what.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, cool. Other than that, like I would I'd want to ask, like, do you have any questions for our next guest? Is there something that you'd want to ask somebody, another engineer, something that you think you've been thinking about that you'd like to hear an opinion from others?
That's a very interesting question. And our engineers are using AI in their workflows. I also want to learn from people what are their tips and tricks on using AI to like code, like what have they what are their lessons they have learned in it, how do they review that. My way of reviewing the code is like through the diffs. Like I have this tool called Fork, which is just like a tool, a GitHub tool. And so whenever like before like submitting anything, any PR, like I use Fork and I like compare each and every diff. And yeah, so that's kind of, so just like learning how people do this, collaborate with AI and do this code review would be interesting to know.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a nice question. I'll pass it on to the next guest. But yeah, I think this is the end of the podcast. Jimil, thanks a lot for sharing your insights. I learned a lot from it and hope to see you again on the pod in the future.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Verlik, for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Yeah, I would love to, do it again.
Thanks. Bye, guys.